At Convergence, we often talk about the future. We try to pontificate on what the future might hold, on what's coming in the future. And this is basically what technology companies do, right? They try to somewhat predict or at least influence the future. But I feel like recently we've been inundated with views of the future by Hollywood. Science fiction is back on the rise, and what's particularly interesting is this new genre called near-fi. Near-fi basically takes technology that already exists and extends it just a little bit further. Unfortunately, almost every view that Hollywood gives you is a dystopian view of the universe. And so, within a couple of years, if you watch Black Mirror, everything will be a disaster and nobody wants to be around. What I want to do today is talk about not so much the future, but the present. Because what we've predicted in the past has actually already come to fruition. And these things are not the distant future. Maybe it's the near future, but in many cases, it already is the reality. And what hopefully we get out of our conversation today is not a fear of the future, but an understanding of what to do about it. Because it's already the reality. And we shouldn't be surprised. The world is a very different place, but we had warning a long time ago. So I grew up in New Jersey. And one of the things that always fascinated me were toll booths. Now, for anybody that's been to Jersey, you know there's lots of turnpikes and parkways and bridges to get into New York, so there are lots of toll booths. And when I was a kid, a young kid, I actually thought that working at a toll booth was a pretty cool job. You got to meet all these people, and they kept giving you money, and you got to give the money back, and you had to figure out how much change to give people. This is before everybody gave you a 20 and you had to just subtract from 20. There was actually different mixes of currency. And that job, when I was a little bit older, sort of went away because they came up with these machines that took the money for you. Now this must be a really old photo because I think it's like $6.50 to go over the bridge now. But that was a fun time also. I didn't really regret them getting rid of a lot of the toll booth operators because you got to try to throw the change over from the passenger side. I don't know if you've ever done that. So that was really fun. But now if you're in New Jersey, of course, you have an easy pass. Not only are there no toll booth operators, but there aren't even toll booth machines. You just drive through. I don't live in New Jersey anymore. I live in California. And California is where we innovate. So in California, we don't have easy passes anymore because you got to slow down to get those RFID cards read. California, if you go up to 73 now, actually if you go from San Diego to LA, for those of you that are flying out of LAX, if you take the 73, it's a toll road. The thing is, there's no toll booth. So there's no toll operator, there's no coin machine, there's not even an easy pass. All you have to do is drive as fast as you can, because it's a toll road, so I don't think there are any police on the road. So most people, you can see in this picture, I think this guy's doing 80, and most of the people don't slow down at all. And it's taking a picture. It probably is also clocking your speed, so it can send you a debit or a request for payment directly to you based on your information at the DMV, and if you're going too fast, it probably also sends you a ticket. That was something that happened over many, many years. So we had this coming, right? If you were paying attention, particularly if you like these toll booths, you already saw what was coming in the future. There used to be a lot of toll booth operators. Today, software is completely eating the world. We talked about this last year, but let me give you some statistics. 10 years ago, there were 10,000 software companies. Today, so that was 10 years ago. Today, there are over 100,000 software companies. And by 2027, so the stat came out last year, so it was roughly 10 years later, they predict that there will be over 1 million software companies. That's according to Forrester Research. 1 million software companies. I talked about this last year. They did a poll of Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 CEOs, and they asked everybody very simple information. What's your name? What's the name of your company? How many employees do you have? What's your revenue? What industry are you in? 70% of the CEOs said that they were in technology. So even traditional companies have changed the way they think about their business. And the reality is that organizations have to innovate or they're going to fail. And this is not a prediction. I don't need to predict this anymore. This is already happening. So think about this. 60 years ago, or actually 1958, the average lifespan of a company was 60 years. That meant not that every startup would last 60 years, but if you had a company that made it through the first year or so, it was likely that that corporation was going to last 60 years. In 2012, that number was reduced by 75%. The average company lasted 15 years. I'm pleased to report that Cornerstone is 18 years old. Today, so only a few years later, the average lifespan is even less than it was a few years ago. So the number keeps going down. And the reality is technology is changing industry after industry. CEOs have to upskill and reskill their workforces. It's just the reality of what's happening. At this point, 90% of all CEOs surveyed expect their companies to be disrupted by technology. The only thing surprising about that stat is the 10% that think their companies are not going to be disrupted. They have to upskill the workforce, but the reality is most of them don't believe they're equipped with the right skills for the future, with the right skills to be competitive, with the right skills to compete, not 10 or 20 years from now, right? The lifespan of the company isn't expected to be that long. 3 or 5 years from now. In the companies that haven't adapted to this change, to the way that the world is transitioning, those companies are no longer around. All of these companies are disappearing. Their stores are closing. Their businesses are liquidating. And this is something that's happening across industries. You think about a company like Toys R Us. It was an iconic company for the childhood of many, many people. And now doesn't exist. Company doesn't exist. Jeffrey doesn't exist. And it's not just companies, it's people, it's jobs. And there's not any position out there that's immune. This is impacting every position in every company. If it hasn't impacted your position already, it means that you've already been developing and you just haven't been paying attention. It's just part of what you naturally do. Or it means that it's coming. It just hasn't happened yet. But it's happening. It's happening across the board. If you think about kids today, 65% of kids in primary school today will have jobs when they graduate college that don't exist right now. So that kid in the video, it's highly unlikely that he will have a job that exists when he graduates college. He'll be in some new field. So think about it. In the last 5 years, jobs were created that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. Virtual reality consultants, social media managers, data scientists, driverless car engineers, drone operators, user experience managers. These things simply didn't exist. Some of them are even made up now, like millennial generation experts. I don't know what kind of job that is. It's every industry that's being disrupted. It doesn't matter. If you think about how you live your life now, think about what you did this past weekend. This past weekend, my son had a soccer tournament. It was in some town I never heard of, somewhere in the middle of California. So I checked Waze to figure out what time I had to leave. I used GPS to get there. They had a ridiculously long break between games, so we checked to see what movies were playing at the local movie theater, bought tickets online, and on the way there realized we had to stop for brunch, and so we actually checked Google Maps to figure out what restaurants were nearby, checked Yelp to figure out which of the restaurants were good, and then used GPS to get to that restaurant that was near the movie theater, went to breakfast, went to the movie, went back to the soccer game. That's just the way we live now. None of those things would have been possible 10 years ago, probably not even 5 years ago. And it's hard to explain to kids today, right? They don't understand that we used to just drive around near the soccer field and hope we found a restaurant. That's why so many of us ate at McDonald's all the time. So it was the only one we knew. It's just a different world. And so as a result, every industry is being impacted. In that case, it was transportation, it was entertainment, it was food and beverage, right? That was all just one afternoon. If you think about almost any aspect of your life, the way you do things is very different now than the way you used to do things. And this impacts every single industry that you used to interact with. That's what you do at home. Of course, it's even more true if you think about your jobs. Technology's changed our lives. It's changed the industries we work in. It's changed the companies we work for. But it's also changed our jobs. And as a result, work has changed. Every aspect of work is different, and the skills you need to be effective at your job, the competencies that the employees need to be effective, to be competitive, are changing. So, how do you stay successful in business? Your business needs to evolve. It's that simple. Your business needs to evolve in this new world, and because things are changing so quickly, your business needs to evolve with the pace of change. And that pace is increasing, it's accelerating. But that's not enough. In order to change your company, you obviously have to evolve your people. And today's people are the ones that are going to solve tomorrow's problems. So they're the ones you have to focus on. They're the ones you have to develop. So I want to look at what's changed, right? What's changed both in the way we manage people, the way we work with people, and in the jobs that people have had. Because if there were enough people to just reskill the organization tomorrow by just replacing all the people you have, hopefully your company won't do that, but a lot of companies would. A lot of companies would just say, oh, you know what, it's easier, I'll just get new people, and the new people will know how to do things. It's not that easy. In fact, even the whole concept of how we attract and recruit people is extremely different than it used to be. So think about this. If you were looking for unskilled workers, right, people like truck drivers or mechanics or factory workers, there are now a higher number of applicants than there are jobs. Well, okay, fine. There's always more applicants than there are jobs. But think about this for a minute. So in 2012, there were about 1.5 million jobs for mechanics. And the average salary was close to $40,000. Now the average salary, so that was 2012, that was 6 years ago. Now, the average salary is still the same, still around $40,000. But there are half the number of jobs available for mechanics than there were 6 years ago. That's kind of crazy if you think about it. Now, why is that happening? It's happening because the machines are evolving, right? It's not just the people that need to change, but the machines are changing, which is forcing the need for the people to change. So this is interesting. So on the left here, you see a tractor. What you might not recognize is that on the right is also a tractor. It's a new autonomous tractor. What does that mean? It is a self-correcting, self-driving tractor for farms. No joke. These require people to fix things in a very different way. So, for example, the company that's producing these tractors said that in the past, you had mechanics with wrenches and toolboxes that would fix the equipment that we had, right? They had multi-million-dollar, or it wasn't that expensive before. They had machines that were hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars, and the mechanics would fix the machines. Now the machines are much more expensive. And the machines actually have self-tuning computers. So what that means is the guy with the wrench is no longer required because the tractor itself will tighten the wrenches when the computer notices that a part on the tractor is loose. And the job title has changed because these are now technical jobs. They need scientists to actually be the ones fixing these machines. The toolbox has become a computer. And fixing tractors now requires advanced mathematics skills in order to fix these machines. How about truck drivers? There were 3.5 million truck drivers right now in the US. If you think about all the people that work with truck drivers, so people that help the truck drivers, train the truck drivers, support truck drivers, work on the trucks, there's about 9 million people in the US that have those jobs. Do you think those jobs are going to be around in 10 years? Here's a video of an autonomous truck. Now, you hear a lot of people talking about driverless cars, but you also hear about all the issues with driverless cars, right? They can't see the pedestrian crossing the street. They can't deal with traffic going in multiple directions or all the stops and starts in a city. That's not true with trucking. Long-haul trucking stays predominantly on the freeway. They've already thought about how to deal with that last mile. It's probably the last 5 miles, but the time it takes to get from the highway to wherever the depot is. The issue they're trying to deal with is how do you get from where the warehouse was to the exit where the depot is. That could be hundreds of miles that need to be driven to get from one point to the next. These trucks work really, really well in those conditions. Here's what makes it even more likely that this is going to happen. The trucks are more fuel efficient, so they spend less money on gas. They have lower drag. They are self-correcting like the other tractors, And the driver never falls asleep, and the trucks can be operating 24 hours a day. Tell me why people would still have truck drivers. It's just the reality of the world. So you might be sitting there and thinking, oh yeah, I get it, right? The mechanics and the factory workers and the truck drivers are all in trouble. It's not just those jobs. You think it's only impacting certain jobs. It's not the reality. Think about all the assistants that are out there, right? All the executive assistants, the receptionists, the coordinators that help set things up and do things. Listen to this.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. Sure, what time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Okay, now that was obviously somebody setting up an appointment at a hair salon, but that could have been any kind of appointment, right? That could have been a sales meeting or a need to go to a doctor or anything else like that. So why am I showing you this conversation? Well, on the right side, that was Kathy on the phone at the hair salon answering the questions. On the left side, it's actually a robot. That was Google using an AI-enabled assistant to do the call. That's why everyone laughed when it said, because it wasn't a human. That was a machine. There are already people completely freaked out about this that are saying that at the beginning of the calls, it has to disclose that it's not a human on the call, because you will not be able to tell the difference. So just play that out a little bit. That exists. That was real. Play it out a little bit more. 5 million call center workers in the US, 20 million call center workers worldwide. What's the impact of that kind of technology on those kinds of jobs? This is real. This is happening. You can't stop it at this point. And it's global. This is happening globally. It's not just one part of the world or one industry or one job category that's being affected. This is everything. So what's the impact of this? The impact of this is that we are starting to see a massive difference between skilled jobs, which are plentiful, yet with very few skilled workers able to fill those jobs, on the one hand, and on the other hand, unskilled jobs that are very diminished and lots of unskilled labor. I like to call this the skills divide. We've talked a lot about the digital divide. Most of us now have digital technology, smartphones, broadband at home. This is the next thing to deal with, the skills divide. How are we going to deal with this massive difference? This is going to be the haves and the have-nots. The people who are skilled, that have lots of job opportunities, and the people that are unskilled, that have fewer and fewer and fewer job opportunities. We talked about truck drivers. Let's stick with that for a second. The average truck driver in 1980 was making $110,000 a year. Today, that truck driver, adjusted for inflation, is making $40,000 a year. $110,000 to $40,000. And that's if they have a job. I just showed you that most of those jobs are going to go away entirely. The recruiters are overwhelmed in dealing with these unskilled positions because of the number of applicants that are coming in. So do the math for a second. Your average recruiter has about 40 requisitions that they deal with. And each job opening is getting about 250 applicants. That means that they have to deal with 10,000 applicants for the jobs that they're managing. 10,000. And this is really interesting. Only about 2% of those applicants are actually qualified to do the job. So you got to find the 2% out of those 10,000. Here's a real example. So this is a Siemens plant, a factory that was opened in North Carolina. There were 800 jobs that they were creating at that factory. They had 10,000 applicants for that job. Think about it for a minute. It's almost harder to get a job at a factory than to get into a top-tier school. And yet, only about 15% of those people, out of those 10,000 people, had the very minimum qualifications in reading and writing and mathematics to even be qualified for the job. So for the recruiter, this skills divide is causing a tidal wave of applicants for the relatively few jobs they have that they're trying to fill. And so they have the unpleasant responsibility of not just turning down thousands and thousands of people who are looking for work, but also trying to find a needle in a haystack. What about the other side of the equation? The skilled jobs. Well, there's about 7 million Americans looking for work today who don't possess the skills needed in the 6 million skilled jobs that are available. So there's enough people, just the people don't have the right skills. Since 1980, the number of jobs requiring technical skills increased by 90%. 90%. So this is a massive shift in the workforce. And there's just not enough people to do the work. So you can't, as a company, just hire for it. So not only don't those 7 million people have the skills, but we're not producing enough graduates to fill those jobs. So there's 600,000 open engineering jobs. And you wonder why people talk about STEM all the time. There's less than 100,000 people graduating with engineering degrees. So you have a gap of 500,000 jobs. It's very hard to find those people. So this is the other side of being a recruiter, of working in talent acquisition. Right? Historically, all you would need to do to make this happen was post an ad in a newspaper, right? You had a job, you put an ad in the classifieds in whatever region you needed to be in, and people would see your ad, they read the paper every day, and people would at least know that you had the job. Now, getting people to know you have the job is really, really, really hard. We're in an omni-channel world. There are tons of ways to interact with people, and as a result, it's very hard to predict which way people are going to actually look for a job, which thing they read every day. There's so many social media sites. There are so many different spots within those social media sites. There are so many online places to post and deal with. It's very difficult to find these people, and these people are completely inundated. Now, this stat I think is actually too high, but it makes the point. Even if it was per month, 32 solicitations a week for a skilled worker. So if you have a development manager at your company, or imagine if you had a mobile developer in your company, the number of times that they're being reached out to. Now, this isn't just phone calls. This is any kind of solicitation and includes every time they get pinged on LinkedIn. It's happening dozens of times per month. How, as a company, are you supposed to stand out to get your people that you need for the jobs that you have open? The only way to do it is if you're competitive on the recruiting front. Right? So it's no longer that your company needs to be competitive. It does. But in order for your company to be competitive, you need the people who can make the company competitive. But to do that, you actually have to compete to attract those people. So it's become more competitive to operate a business today. It's not just businesses, right? It's any organization. Think about governments or schools or universities. Las Vegas a couple of years ago tried to hire teachers. It was almost impossible. They were begging teachers to come to Las Vegas. They could not get enough people to fill those jobs. We need, as an organization, to have a frictionless, engaging experience to attract the right people, to be able to select them, to hire them quickly, and to give them a really good onboarding experience because you want to retain them also. And that's really what Cornerstone Recruiting is about. Cornerstone Recruiting is about managing this skills divide, dealing with both sides of the skills divide. So that means, first and foremost, a compelling, effective candidate experience. So if you somehow manage to get somebody who's the right person for the job to click on that link and go to your career site, what's their experience like? You have probably no more than 15 seconds to get them reeled in to actually want to understand and think about your company. And what we found is that most of this today is happening on mobile devices. We rolled out our mobile candidate experience, and in many cases, north of 60% of the people going to the career sites and filling out the applications are doing it from mobile devices. But it's about conversion, right? It's a little bit like e-commerce. You have to get people to go to the site. You then have to get them to put something in a shopping cart, which is effectively like an application. And then you got to get them to actually buy, which in this case is finish, submit the application. What we have found with our new candidate experience, it's 54% higher conversion rates than industry averages. So it works. But it's not just about finding the candidate for those skilled jobs. For the unskilled jobs, for those entry-level jobs, it's also about sorting through and selecting the right people despite the massive influx of candidates that you're going to have, that huge influx of applicants. How do you do that? How do you manage that process? Well, having a simplified way to do this. This is what we put out. Our managed candidates system just came out with our May release, and it's modeled off of Kayak. So for those of you that travel a lot, you know that Kayak lets you sift very quickly through all of the different travel options when you go from point A to point B and make a really quick decision on which flight to take. Same exact idea. It's to help you sift through all the candidates, irrespective of what job rec they applied for, or even if they just applied for the company, and understand exactly how to put those pieces together, how to advance the right people. We're working on, as Summer and Tammy will talk about tomorrow, artificial intelligence to help with auto progression of candidates so the right people are being interviewed and the right people are being selected. You also, as part of this, want to streamline the interview process. Some of the tech companies recently have turned to this idea of actually paying a bonus if somebody comes in to interview. That's how competitive it's getting. Not if you got the job, but if you come in to interview. Because these people get so many solicitations that they don't even want to go through the hassle of having to go interview for the job. Now, of course, you need them to interview for the job. So that interview experience has to be a good experience for the candidate. It's got to be easy for them to be able to do the interview. And maybe most importantly, once they're hired, you have a pretty short window to make that first impression. Right? What is their first day like? What's their first week, month, 6 months like at the company? Most companies with high turnover, the turnover's happening in the first 60 to 90 days. It's that initial experience. People don't think it's a good fit. People don't think the company seems modern enough. They don't care about my development. They're not personalizing the experience for me. Right? People expect a consumer-like experience now. So onboarding, the induction of new employees is very different than it used to be, and the expectations of how people get onboarded is very different than it used to be. And lastly, you want to optimize the way you are going through this process. You want to make sure that people are having an optimal experience, but also that your recruiters are working efficiently and effectively, your hiring managers are being effective, people aren't waiting too long to make decisions because the candidates aren't waiting around. So making sure that you're being effective in the whole process is really important to manage that skills divide, to deal with both sides of the equation. But it's not enough. It's not enough to just track the applicants. It's not enough to recruit. Because there aren't enough people to fill all those jobs, you also have to develop the employees that you have. You cannot recruit your way out of this. There's not enough people to recruit.